Ellen Bass's poem And What If I Spoke of Despair was first published in the Missouri Review in 2001. The poem discusses Ellen Bass's despair over the actions of modern humans, including the destruction of the environment and genetic engineering, two factors that make her lose hope in the sanctity of humanity as a whole. Let's see the summary of the poem. The poem begins with the titular question, And what if I spoke of despair? Who doesn't feel it? Immediately, readers are engaged because the poet is implying that everybody, including her readers, feels despair. In the second through sixth lines, she uses a long sentence to go into more detail about the physical effects of despair on people. The poet uses the phrase, who doesn't know the way it ceases, to underscore her belief that everybody feels despair at some point or another. Likewise, by noting the blood sloshing through our veins, she attributes the rush of blood, the physical side of an increased heart rate, one of the side effects of many powerful emotions such as fear or despair, to the community at large. At the same time, the poet is careful to note that while everybody feels despair, there is no comfort in this fact. Grief is still very much a personal experience. Having defined her belief that despair affects everybody, though in individual ways, the poet now hooks the reader with a very odd statement that starts in the last half of line 6 and continues through until line 8. The statement, its beauty that brings it on, calls it out from the wings for one more song, seems out of place. Bass is deliberately trying to disorient her readers. In the previous lines, she has introduced the idea of despair and grief, so one might expect that the rest of the poem is going to be a dark poem, filled with negative images. Bass takes the exact opposite approach. However, she says that beauty of nature brings on her personal despair. She notes a very pastoral natural image, rain pooled on a fallen oak leaf. The pooled rain creates a mirror in which the poet can see a reflection of a cloudy sky, an image that implies an uncertain future. At this point, Bass still has not explained why these beautiful images of nature make her grieve. Over the next few lines, Bass continues this trend of providing natural image, yet does not explain why this brings her pain. She talks about the red moon in September, which is so massive and awe-inspiring that people feel compelled to stop their cars and get out and look at it. Following this image at the end of line 13 and into the next line, Bass switches gears somewhat with the phrase, like a photo of a lover in his uniform, not yet gone. The reader starts to get an indication of why natural images are bringing the poet grief. The hypothetical photo of the soldier in uniform and the observation that he is not yet gone implies that someday he will be. Military service can be a dangerous job, and the poet is noting that even though the lover is alive in her hypothetical photo, he may someday live on only in the photo. In the same way, the poet is implying that someday natural phenomena might only be as alive as the images in a photo. Though the poet is giving some indication that she is worried over the future life of nature, she has not yet explained why exactly she is concerned. At the beginning of line 15, the poet once again turns the discussion from the global general images of nature to the specific life of the reader. She says, or your own self as a child, encouraging each reader to remember back to his or her own childhood. The poet draws on an image that many of her readers will identify with, a family day on the beach. The scene she draws is one of peace and innocence, of a child falling asleep in the sun without a care in the world. In the beginning of line 20, however, the poet brings the reader back from this happy memory into the present. It is at this point that the poet confronts the reader directly. That's when you can't deny it. The poet talks about the fact that elements like water and air are still in existence and equates these natural elements with the mother's nurturing, which she expresses in symbol images, sweeping hair off our brow, her scent swirling around us. This underscores the family image that she already used of a child at the beach. Up until now, Bas has combined beautiful images of nature with an increasingly sense of doom, but has not explained why people should be concerned. In the middle of line 23, however, the poet notes that the child, that is humanity, is destroying its mother nature. Ultimately, humanity's population, such as the kind created by automobiles, could destroy Mother Nature's ability to nurture. The poet holds all humanity responsible, including the readers. She says, "But now your own car is pumping poison, delivering its fair share of destruction." In the middle of line 25, the poet begins to discuss genetic engineering, another factor that she says is destroying nature. She starts by talking about a salmon that has been genetically engineered with the red, white, and blue shining on one side. The colors refer to the colors of the American flag. Bas is noting the fact that when countries begin genetic engineering, they take ownership of nature and could start literally modifying natural organisms like fish to display a symbol of ownership. In this case, the American flag. While Bas feels this is bad enough, in line 27, Bas notes that genetic engineering sometimes crosses even more profound natural boundaries, such as the boundary between plant and animal, as in the case of frog genes spliced into tomatoes. Bas sees this as an affront to the tomato, which she says has been humiliated enough. Readers might wonder what Bas means by this statement. Most likely, the poet is referring to the various genetic experiments on tomatoes that took place around the turn of the 21st century when Bas wrote the poem. In line 29, Bas uses the idea of genetic engineering to segue into the threat of nuclear war. I heard a man argue that genetic engineering was more dangerous than a nuclear bomb. Through another question, presumably directed at the reader, Bas wonders about the implications of this argument. Should I be thankful he was alarmed by one threat or worried he had gotten used to the other? Bas is noting the fact that the threat of nuclear warfare, while still a threat, has been around for 6 decades, since the end of World War II, ushered in the atomic age. This has given many people time to get used to it. The widespread discussion and use of genetic engineering, however, is relatively new. So for many it can be perceived as more of a threat because people are not used to it. Bas's question also implies in a subtle way that if genetic engineering is allowed to continue, perhaps someday people will get used to this too. At the end of line 33, Bas shifts gears one last time. For these remaining 9 lines, Bas acknowledges that she has reason to lose hope that these issues will be resolved. Maybe I can't offer you any more than you can offer me. In other words, Bas is saying that she does not have any solutions to offer the reader, and the reader most likely does not have any solutions to offer her. Yet Bas is defiant and refuses to just sit and do nothing. Her way of coping with the problems addressed in the poem is to confront her despair directly. In this final extended image, the poet stands in a very natural setting on the trail with shreds of manzanita bark lying in russet skulls and yellow bay leaves. In this setting, the poet embraces despair as she has children even when it was necessary to hold them. The poet acknowledges that embracing despair is an unnecessary act because it probably will not change anything. As the title indicates, the poet is mainly discussing despair, which is a profound and total loss of hope. In the beginning of the poem, Bas describes the physical effects of despair, the sudden rush of blood through a person's veins when they begin to feel this powerful emotion, the way that despair ceases, leaving us limp. Following this introduction, Bas gives readers several examples that explain why she is losing hope. She cites several natural items such as rain, sky, leaves, and sand, drawing the reader into the natural world. She also talks about lost loved ones, or at least the potential for lost loved ones, by invoking a hypothetical photo of a lover in his uniform not yet gone. This draws the reader into the human world throughout the poem. Baz warns her readers up to both of these worlds, invoking ideas with which most readers can identify, such as a family day at a beach where you fell asleep with sand in the crack of your smooth behind. Baz speaks about the natural and human worlds in ways that imply they may not exist, at least in their present forms, someday. Over the course of the poem, Baz reveals that her despair is generated from the fact that the purity of nature and the sanctity of humanity, two things in which she believes deeply, are being compromised in various ways. The first major way that nature is being destroyed is through pollution. The example she cites is air pollution. But now your own car is pumping poison, delivering its fair share of destruction. Air pollution results from the release of certain chemicals into the air. One of the most common is the release of carbon monoxide, which is a byproduct from the use of internal combustion engines found in many vehicles. This is a form of pollution that many people, including Baz's readers, help to create. Air pollution is not the only environmentally destructive thing that humanity creates, but it is the only one mentioned in the poem. This is intentional on Baz's part. Generally speaking, poets aim to utilize as little space as possible to convey their meaning to the reader. Each word has a purpose, and extraneous words or lines are ruthlessly cut so that poem can be tightly constructed and have the most impact. Baz realizes that discussions of environmental destruction are generally not limited to one issue, such as air pollution. Like the Earth's ecosystem, many aspects of environmentalism are interconnected, and it is difficult to discuss one environmental issue without getting into other related issues. The poet could have filled this section of her poem with several examples of environmental destruction to get her point across, yet this is unnecessary because most of her audience will understand that air pollution from cars is not the only issue that threatens to destroy the environment. Genetic engineering, on the other hand, is relatively new, so Baz feels compelled to give more than one example. Though some of Baz's audience may be familiar with the various genetic experiments that are being performed these days, they might not realize the extent to which genetics is being used to modify animals and plants. For this reason, Baz gives one example of each. The first example, a salmon with the red, white, and blue shining on one side, demonstrates that sometimes ludicrous applications that humans have for science. Genetic engineering gives humanity the power to change nature any way it wants, in the theory at least, and Baz notes that this power is being used in frivolous ways, such as creating signs of ownership like the American flag. In her second example, which addresses genetically modified food, Baz paints a Frankenstein-like picture of weird experiments involving mismatched parts, in this case frog genes spliced into tomatoes. Nature would never create this combination, and Baz is saying that since humanity is doing this, it is threatening the purity of both nature and humanity. Though the poem only directly addresses the genetic engineering of fish and tomatoes, the unspoken fear is that this tampering might eventually lead to tampering with or cloning of human genes. This is why Baz cites one man's argument that genetic engineering is more dangerous than a nuclear bomb. While a nuclear bomb can kill an immense number of people, it has only the power to destroy. Some people believe this is secondary to the effects of genetic engineering, which can change humanity itself at the genetic level.